documentary directing? Producing. Okay. Reviewing. Good. Yeah.
Sound directing.
Sound. Really good. Yeah.
I would say writing, directing, and cinematography as well.
But writing first,
Yeah.
foremost. Okay.
I'd probably say sound, writing, cinematography, and producing.
Good. Good.
I've done acting since I was a little girl, just trying to get in the filmmaking in the last year, so I am really proud of what I'm at with.
What interests you particularly about filmmaking?
Film music.
Music. Do you sing, play?
I play piano.
Okay. Classically trained?
I'm doing exams, I've just got that in the grades, but yeah.
Yeah. Do you improvise?
Yeah, I've got a little bad habit, well it's not bad habit, to learn by ear, so
Yeah,
I'm
me
trying to
too.
get back
Yeah.
with them.
I think we probably do need to. I forgot it was Newcastle from Central.
Gives atmosphere.
And do you use like keyboard synths and things like that?
Yeah, I've
Okay.
recently started doing it now.
So have you done any film music for any of these guys?
No, I've just met a few of them.
Okay, composer, first one. Okay.
Acting, directing, music.
In that order. Acting, directing, music. Okay, do you play also?
Yeah, I do guitar, but I do scores on the computer as well.
Okay, what, Sibelius or?
I have used Sibelius, I don't use Sibelius, but
Okay.
I use like a variety of programs.
Yeah.
Pro Guitar I use quite a lot.
Okay, so
Because you can get like cellos and stuff as well.
That's absolutely right.
Producing, directing, editing. Rather go to directing than producing, but I'm still open up there.
Okay.
Producing, cinematography, and
Editing,
editing. Cinematography and editing.
right?
Acting and directing.
Directing, editing, and sound.
Good. Come on, don't be shy.
It's never too late to start. Starting popcorn.
Yeah. Well, good. I mean, what's interesting is you've got pretty much aspects of every division there, as potentially as teams, because you do need all of the things we've mentioned. Is anything missing? We've had editing, producing, critique,
casting,
acting, well, casting.
yeah.
Well, I mean, you cast yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, there's enough people in this room who said acting.
Yeah.
And some people who didn't say acting who probably could be persuaded to act as well. Because you know what, the best way to learn directing is to actually, it's a bit like doing karaoke, it's just act. It's horrible, then you don't have to ever do it again, but at least you understand the raw fear that an actor will go through when someone says action, you know. And the process, it's very interesting to understand the process. So at this stage, the more that you do, it's like everybody edits a bit, everybody does a bit of that. I'm assuming that all the editing is based on, do you all use PC or Mac?
Yeah, I do.
Which?
I use PC and I use editing software. It's Adobe Premiere.
Okay, pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most of the stuff is cinema is Mark.
Yeah, here,
Yeah.
or in general, yeah. But they both work, you know, just we're all such snobs for Apple, you know. You pay like 3 times the normal price and all that, and feel happy somehow. But just keep buying their products, you know, and they're now what the richest company in the world, and they don't pay tax. So it's a wonderful world. And, but you know, so judging by what you all said and the fact you're all just starting out, you potentially have what's called a team, right? Self-contained. What's very important is critiquing. You know, it really is that somebody within your own team is capable of having an outside eye and saying, you know, this is what I think, you know. And in a sense, we should all do that anyway. We should all self-critique, you know. If you leave it to professional critics, it's not great, and they're not great. They're pretty bad, and usually they're not. They don't know that much about cinema, etc., etc. So. While we're having the break, somebody asked me an interesting question. Do you want to ask it again?
I realised quite a lot of directors, they like to go into kind of film a lot of stuff in black and white if they wanted to do an art house kind of film or something like that. Is it because black and white is very good for lighting and getting emotion and the effect of the scene in. Is that why they prefer to do it? Because it's kind of the black and white is better for.
It's a funny thing. I mean, it's like, number one, it's not real, is it? So, I mean, film is not real. So, you know, the more companies develop fake reality, the ability to read a color accurately, to read focus accurately, and so on. So, we're now seeing this kind of like technology leaping towards the impersonation of reality. So, very interesting. If you look at pre-1950s, all the cameras, there was a combination of having to use a lot of light because the film stocks were very slow, so you needed light in order for the film to actually have an image, right? But the lenses were also very, very, what we call soft, unlike a contemporary lens. So like I was saying earlier, detail was a little blurred, and it was a great beauty lens. So you look at images of, let's say, famous actresses of that period, and there's this, there's probably a bunch of them downstairs in the cafe, of screen goddesses, Marilyn Monroe. If you look at them, they're really soft, they're almost out of focus, all of them, and they have a kind of glow to them. And you look at Hitchcock films from that period with Grace Kelly or, whoever. There's a really beautiful, unreal look about the cinematography, also in black and white. We get through the 50s and we start to get CinemaScope and Technicolor and all those things, and the ability to recreate color. And so if you look at those color films from that period, even the Technicolor ones, which are the easiest ones to preserve, and the color, it's very bright. It's like red is red, and the subtlety, the gradation between color is not very subtle, but people were like, wow, color, widescreen. And there was a real seduction of the audience that took place, and then 3D, and then stereo sound, and then Dolby, and all these things. Actually, for me, when you go back to these earlier films, which are mono and black and white, or let's say black, grey, down to almost a white, I find them in a way easier to be with, just because I know film is not real. It's not reality, it's fake reality. And the same when you talk to most fine art photographers, they would still prefer to shoot in monochrome. It's a better word than black and white. It's not black or white, it's monochrome. It's the absence of color. And that's because you talk to someone like Salgado, a great landscape photographer, and he's never shot in color. He said he tried once and he just didn't like it, because actually there's so much more detail in monochrome than there is in color. And for certain kind of aesthetic and certain kind of storytelling, black and white seems to work really, really, really well. The other way to approach it is to think of color as being much more monochrome, a little bit desaturated. So like I was saying, when we were looking at the light earlier, because we turned all these lights off, whilst you were both still in color, there was a kind of much more subtle, your colors weren't leaping out, your skin tone, the flesh tones weren't leaping out, it was more subtle. So a combination of either use less light or don't use color seems to work really well for cinema. It's a kind of sensual look that cinema has, that audiences seem to respond to. It's tricky. If you make one in black and white, you may put off a whole bunch of people. I don't want to watch a black and white film. They have a real aversion to it because they immediately, for them, it means art, and they're aware of the idea that it might be in for a 3-hour film about a fly slowly crawling across the wall of a corpse. Two miserable people just looking at each other and not saying anything. That's for them that's an art house film. And they have a point,
Yeah.
So they say, no, I'll go for something in colour, because I think I have more chance that people will be moving and chatting and generally leaping around, possibly shooting each other, blood, great,
Was that why that recent film, the one that took a lot of the Artist, is that why was that such a huge risk for the studio because they thought loads of people would, just because it was black and white, they'll just turn their nose at it?
No, it was a novelty, and it was a novelty picked up by a man called Harvey Weinstein, who's basically a criminal, and responsible for some of the most successful films of the last 30 years. He's kind of a thug,
Right.
he and his brother, and he's known as Harvey Scissorhands because he buys a film and then re-edits it. And he is a thug, and I say this from first-hand experience. He wouldn't even mind because he's a thug. And so he's the kind of guy that would buy a film, and then he'd look at the indie market and see there's 3 other films that are kind of like the film I just bought, and he'll buy them too, and then he'll just kill them, he'll put them on the shelf. He basically buys them to take them off the market, and those filmmakers will never see their film again. There's actually a book about him. So he, I think, picked up distribution on it wasn't a studio, it was a French production on the artist, and then he just marketed the hell out of it, which he is a genius at, He'll make phone calls. You'll get a phone call from him saying, you will vote for this at the Academy, like the Godfather. He's like the Godfather. And literally, he's fearless and tireless, and if he goes for a film, actually that film has a very, very good chance of winning a few awards because he is an amazing producer. So, I have absolute admiration for, God bless anybody that happens to get picked up by him that doesn't get shelved but gets promoted. And he has an incredibly high success rate. So, did you notice a huge number of black and white silent films that followed it?
No, just one. Yeah.
Just the one. It was a novelty.
Right.
He's definitely not going to then promote the idea of silent film. The best joke I heard about the artist was someone said, I just illegally downloaded it. It was crap, there's no sound. Next question.
Isn't that standard studio practice that to buy ball competitors and then sit on them?
Probably, yeah. That opens up a whole thing. Like, okay, we're in Newcastle. You're all going to be great filmmakers and editors and filmmaking community. You have that opportunity right now. It's a moment in time where if you kind of proceed down this road, a success could follow. Right? Definitely, it's a possibility. Limited possibility, right? The odds are stacked against you in many, many ways, but it's right now anything's possible, right? One of the things you would have to do is to already start thinking about where you're going to screen your film, and what's the environment you're going to screen your film in. Let's call it a cinema. Now, luckily you're sitting in a venue which is unique, so they would probably be sympathetic to the idea of screening this for you, because it represents good energy in the community. It's part of their remit. It's why this cinema exists. But in some places there aren't cinemas like this. In fact, in most places there wouldn't be a cinema like this. And also, you don't have to just show it here. You could, get a screening here, but then you might want, because you've all got mates, right? You all look kind of socially okay. So you're not pariahs, are you? So between you, there's probably another couple of hundred people that you all know on Facebook, etc., who more or less like you, right? And they've also got mates, right? So you could probably fill a space by using social media if you did it smartly enough, right? And call it a cinema. So what is that? It's a room that can have a blackout, in which a reasonable projector, probably something like this, and a couple of those speakers, JBLs or whatever. That's all a cinema is, isn't it? A blackout, a projector, and some speakers. And maybe you're running it off your Mac, or you make a Blu-ray or something like that, right? That's all it is. Then can you fill that space more than one night? And if it's good enough, will those people then tweet about it, go on Facebook, and this is a really cool film. It's only running for 2 weeks, Suddenly you've got 2 weeks sold out. If you can do that, you have a case and get somebody to review it. Well, actually, you've got your own critics here, right? Hands up the critics. There was more than a few. Yeah, loads of you. You'd probably all give it quite a good review, right?
Well, if it's their own stuff,
Yeah, but okay.
Yeah, I know what you mean, yeah.
You get someone to write about it.
Yeah.
And what is a review? Actually, it's maybe something on Twitter. It's maybe something on Facebook. It's not necessarily in the Journal or the Chronicle or,
Because I've actually found myself more with quite a lot of the movies I go to see. Instead of just reading what some the critics think, you know, like Keith Kermit and lots of other people actually go on Twitter and stuff like that and actually see.
Absolutely.
Because they're more honest critics.
Yeah. So let's say a combination of that. Probably then you could get a local TV station to do a news item about you, because it seems like a bunch of young filmmakers have set up their own cinema in blah blah blah, whatever, right? And that then becomes a news item, you know, and so then people kind of go, oh, that sounds interesting, and then, you know, and then maybe they find you on Facebook. So how smart you can be with social media, but like almost as you start to think of what is the film, you start thinking about what is the cinema. You know, then you have a chance of success. There's no point in making a like genius film if it just goes on the shelf, whether it's Harvey Weinstein's shelf or anybody else's. You know, at the end of the day, the point is you want to make a film because you want people to see it, and then their reaction to that film will entirely influence the next film you make. You kind of go, they really like this or this, and that was because you can't judge the film until you see it with a hostile audience. Showing it to your mates is a waste of time.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's not a waste of time. If your mates are kind of really mates, they'll say, look, I really liked it, but I've got to tell you, there's like the middle bit was kind of boring, you know. Just like, and you'll notice, because people start wriggling and kind of going to the toilet, and, you know. And you know that suddenly, like, I've lost their focus, you know. And that is the most important moment for you when you've made a film, is you're screening it for your mates or anybody, is you just be aware of the room, and that will speak to you. And you kind of think the scene that you thought was the greatest scene in the history of cinema, you realise actually it may be a great scene, but it's in the wrong place in my film. Because the other thing that's really hard to judge when you're making films is to decide, is it a bad scene, or is the scene in the wrong place? You know, have we had 3 slow scenes in a row? And maybe if I split that up by putting the car crash in the middle of that, maybe then the audience would have woken up and they'll tolerate a slower scene there. But almost like when you write a script, you think about it as an emotional graph, you know? And then, okay, that scene, they're just talking, that scene, they're just talking. Oh, that scene, something happens, there's a fight or whatever it is. You almost have to think about it in those crude terms, as like, what is the attention span of an audience? And that's based on yourself. What is your own, you know, when you go and see a film, at what point do you get bored? Is it because they've just been talking for too long, or it's just like, is it just a bad film? Right. But you know, is it quite a good film? But I have to say, I got a little bit sleepy at that moment. And then I analyse why. Why did I get sleepy? Why did I start to lose my focus? You know. So the film I was screening last night, you know, it took me. It's not that it took me 4 years to write it. I wrote it over a period of 4 years. I was doing other things, and I wasn't in a hurry. So then in the last year I decided, okay, I now need to get this ready as a film. So I then started focusing on more like the practical issues and also raising money. So then I made the film, which was very, very difficult. I had real problems with some of the actors, some of the crew, you know, it was difficult. I had real problem raising the money. Then I edited it, and I edited it based on my script that I'd written for 3 or 4 years. And then I previewed. And I remember the day before doing my first preview, which was in my own little studio with about 25 people, projector like this. I was thinking, I was feeling pretty good. I was thinking, wow, it was really worth it, the struggle, all these years, blah, blah, blah. I think it's a pretty damn good film, you know. I was feeling confident. The audience came in, I bought some beers and some sandwiches and crisps and things. They all came in, like, can't wait to see your film. And I started to feel really a bit kind of under pressure. And then I clicked my Mac and it started, the film started, you know. Within 10 minutes, I really just wanted to slash my wrists. You know? I'm not kidding, because I knew what was, the first 10 minutes was so boring. And then there's another like 2 hours. Because it was too long, of course, first cut. You know, it's like, there's another 2 hours of this absolute garbage coming, you know. And I just didn't want to be in the room. I had to just sit there, and I was like looking at people. Somebody was texting, my producer. Probably help get me out of this room. I want to die. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking everybody really hates this film, and I really hate it. And I've wasted so much time and money making this absolute piece of garbage, you know. And I was convinced of that. absolutely convinced. And, you know, sometimes you kind of go, well, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I thought I lost, you know. So it finished, and actually I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, you know. And somebody said, wow, it's really interesting, okay. And a conversation started, where people started going, yeah, but who actually did it? I mean, I was a little puzzled, I have to say, about, was he in France, or was it, did he imagine that, or did that really happen? And it's like, they just started talking. I was thinking, well, they didn't hate it. And I sort of said, but didn't you think it was boring? And they said, it's a little long. I mean, you could get 10 minutes out of it, you know, but I'm really intrigued to know the plot, and, you know, and maybe that needs more clarity. And they were entirely positive. I mean, I still thought it was an absolute piece of garbage, you know, but they didn't. And so I had a good night's sleep. In fact, I had a day off, and I came back in, and I basically opened up a new file, and I started from zero again, and I recut it, based on a long, hard think about the structure. I knew there was a fundamental, massive problem in the film about the structure. It just didn't work. And it was based on an assumption from the script that this character was this kind of a person. Then this actor did not give me that option. That actor gave me another option. You know, not necessarily a bad one, but a different one from my original concept. And you either can fight that, or you can kind of go, you know what, a film is really about the result of all these things, your decisions. So I completely changed my original direction, and I recut the film based on the reality of what I had rather than what I didn't have. And then I did a screening again. This time I didn't think it was a great film or a bad film. I just now was intrigued to see, based on my changes, how people would respond.
Did you do that all from the stuff that you had?
Yeah, I had tons of
in
material.
your files, so you didn't have to actually reshoot anything?
No, I didn't reshoot anything. I did a cheeky thing where, that thing where you haven't one. No one saw the film. I don't think of you guys, did you?
Yeah.
Some of you did, but there's a scene you did. There's a scene where our main character becomes suspicious of this woman, who's from France, and he decides to go and check her out in her hometown of Bar-de-Luc, near Nancy, you know, which I'd picked off on the map. We didn't have enough money to go to Bar-de-Luc, you know, so we shot it in Soho, in a swimming pool, the scene. But he had to get to France, right? So, like, do we buy stock footage of a plane taking off, you know, a plane landing, you know, of Nancy airport, you know, and then a point of view of a car and a taxi. So I just wrote in script form, scene 53, plane takes off. Scene 54, plane lands. Scene 55, taxi, or something like that, I can't remember. And I just put it in as text. You know, it's like a script. So does the audience really need to see boring footage of a plane taking off again? Probably not, you know. Just give them the information that the plane did take off and it landed, you know. So I did a few cheeky things like that, like low budget. And then I invited maybe 8 people from the original screening and then new people. So I wanted a reaction of people who'd seen it before and new people. And then screened it again. It was now shorter, and then I got their reactions, and that was fascinating. And then at that point it became really useful, because then I was like literally asking them, but do you understand this plot point? And they kind of go, oh, I have no idea, what do you mean? Like, okay, I need to make that clear. Okay, I was making notes. So it was like, now it was all practical. So then I went away and carried on with the cut. I didn't recut now, but I fine cut, and then I started adding music. You know, I put temp music in, and then I started adding, you know, little bits of classical music and some original score and all of that. And then that was the final process towards the end of the film. So that would be, you know, to me a vital part of making any film, which is this self-examination and using like a half-friendly audience, you know, and inviting them to be honest, you know. And the real question is, were you bored? I mean, it's like the worst thing you can do in a. If you're bored in a film, you kind of failed, haven't you? You know.
It's worse than being angry at a film. Really. Oh.
I don't mind when people kind of, I really hated this film. It made me so angry. And the blood, I was like, great.
Because it got a reaction.
Yeah, you woke up. You know, the worst thing is the sound of a snore or someone going to their third wee-wee. You know, or making a phone call. You know, so really, it's like that struggle for just like, as I said originally. have your dynamics given you at least the chance of keeping the audience awake and focused in some way. And if you do too many scenes in a row that are talky, you know, and then one of them, they said, we really hated that scene. It could be unfair. It could be that's a really good scene. It's just you put it in the wrong place. So sometimes, you know, you make the most outrageous transitions of, like when I was editing Leaving Las Vegas, low budget, so we didn't have a lot of footage. And the first cut, it was too long. And just too long to get the story going, and I started moving things around. So in that film, there is a massive continuity error, which is the scene when Nicolas Cage, who has been married at a certain point, loses his wedding ring through being with a hooker, actually, who steals his wedding ring. And then the next scene, he goes to the bank to try and draw out the last of his money, and his hands are shaking, and he's wearing a wedding ring, you know. But I just prayed that nobody would really notice. Of course, people do notice, you know. You could have digitally taken out the wedding ring, but I didn't have enough money in post-production. So sometimes you just have to take a risk, and because ultimately the scene, and pray that the continuity is not really going to kill you. You know, like he's got a cut, he doesn't have a cut. You know, these things that you kind of think are cool when you're shooting the film, and then you kind of go, why did I do that? You know, I did another film where Dennis Quaid got beaten up, and then I took out the fight, and then just, and I really went like Scorsese, yeah, hit him harder, smash him in the face. Yeah. Then you hit him with the billiard cue. It's like, you know, you should be in sort of like emergency and a life support system. So we got away with, and I remember the makeup artist saying, Mike, should we just be careful, not too much damage to the eye? So I've just given him a little cut here and a slightly back eye, and he went, yeah, it doesn't look very strong. On the other hand, it looks pretty weird when he wakes up the next morning, hasn't had a fight, and suddenly he's got a big cut in his face and a black eye, you know. So you pray that you haven't shot yourself in the foot that way.
You said before, normally Hollywood calls you and it's pretty much a yes or no question, and you found out how bad the script is. Do you regret your, I guess, Hollywood era?
No, not at all.
Do you regret any of the films?
You know, you can't regret anything. It's all learning, isn't it? And someone wisely once said, you'll learn 10 times more by failing than you will by succeeding. Succeeding is really confusing. So when the first film I made in Hollywood was called Internal Affairs, a cop movie. It's pretty good, actually. You know, it's coming out on Blu-ray quite soon. And the reason it's really good is because I was so stupid. You know, I was naive. I was fearless. You know, I'd never been to Los Angeles before, but I'd seen loads of movies. You know, so I went, yeah, it's got to be like this. You know, it's got to shoot it like this. I was so confident. You know, that got kicked out of me pretty quickly after Internal Affairs. But you know, the first movie. And it was a hit, you know, so I suddenly found myself in this ridiculous situation. I go to a restaurant, Sean Penn comes over and says, hi, Sean, and you kind of think, he must have mistaken me for somebody else, you know. And I look around and kind of go, oh. And he goes, I saw your movie, it's great, love to work with you. And you kind of, wow, you know. And you think, you delude yourself, wow, it's just so easy. Why do people complain about Hollywood? It's a lovely place, and you know, they seem such nice people, you know. Then you make a couple of movies that don't work. And then Sean Penn doesn't come up to your table, or you say, hey Sean, and he kind of goes, hi, and walks straight past, you know. It's literally as black and white as that. So you learn very, very quickly. And then I did one movie, which was a total disaster, which took over 2 years with reshoots, and it was a studio and famous actors and everything. And in that period, that was like going to film school. Because by failing, you learn something from, each time you fail, that's a lesson that goes in really, really hard. You go, oh, I see, they don't like that, they don't like me, they don't like that. Why? Oh, I see, this, and this. And then you start to understand the structure of the studio system, so it's all good, you know. And I think everybody goes in with the intention of making a good film, regardless of, how mainstream or commercial the script is. I don't think anyone had the ambition to make a bad film, although sometimes you wonder, right?
No, I was wondering if some directors, if they're constantly getting praised for all their work, is when they actually have they ever got to a point where when they actually do make a failure, they actually they think it's actually the audience's fault, not their fault.
Sure. I mean, that's the trap of fame and of your ego. You know, if so many thousands of people tell you, like Quentin Tarantino, like tell you you're a genius and you are like the god of young filmmakers and so on. Personally, I detested the last film, and I think he lost the plot in every possible way. But most people don't agree with me that it's a work of, you know, it's a work of art, work of genius. I think it's a rambling story that goes on forever with a lot of gratuitous violence, totally misogynistic, and I don't think it's by any stretch of the imagination the best thing he's done. In fact, I think it's the worst film he ever made. However, I'm in the minority, but I personally think he's lost the plot. And one of the things is that, you know, I've seen him in some interviews where anyone dared to criticize him. And I know him, and he's a lovely guy, and he's entirely 1000% dedicated filmmaker, you know. But I think he's in a fragile position where he's gone out on a limb and made a film, and he doesn't want to hear anything negative. You know, and he's got really aggressive with various interviewers, and, you know, and it's a trap, you know. I tell you, I've always been more comfortable failing than succeeding, because at least failing you know where you are, and you can either make a decision like, oh, well, I'm going to get out of here and do something better, or less violent, or you can kind of go, you know what, I'm going to stick to my guns. I don't agree with what you're saying, and I will continue, and it consolidates you and it makes you focus, you know. Whereas when you succeed, those periods, which haven't been that often, you know, but like after leaving Las Vegas, I was everyone's favorite for at least a week, you know. They loved me for just, you know, I could do no wrong, you know. I got thousands of scripts offered me, and you know, free lunch, and, you know, gosh, you know, and really confusing, you know, like suddenly, you know, the film got nominated and it won all these awards. I mean, loads and loads of awards. That entire year to me was a blur. You know, where you're just kind of nodding, oh, thank you so much, you know, oh, you're so kind. Because you can't say anything. Someone says, I love your film. And what do? You say, you can either be a prick and say, yeah, you're right, it's fucking brilliant. You don't do that. You kind of go, oh, that's really thoughtful of you. And you run out of, how many ways can you say that, you know? Whereas, you know, people don't like your film, at least you've got something to say, you know. You have German interviewers saying to you, I have one question for you. This film, the suspension of, well, no, it was the other one, loss of the sexual innocence. Was this deliberately the worst film in the history of cinema, or was it just an accident? You know? And I go, wow, you prick, you know. So I was quick at that point. I said, I have one question for you. You know, what's your favorite piece of music? And he goes, what has that got to do with anything? I went, just a question, dude, you know. So he said, sadly I can't remember what he said because it wasn't important. And I just started laughing. And I went, that's your favorite piece of music? Okay, I'm not even offended by your question anymore, you know. And he was furious, you know. And it's like sometimes you need to be prepared to defend yourself in some kind of smart-ass way. Otherwise, you get really hurt by things people say, you know. But it's almost like to be prepared for an insult is not a bad thing, you know. But those moments were always more comfortable to me, you know, than failing somehow gives you a grounding. I mean, maybe that's sick, you know. But let's face it, if you're going to be a filmmaker, at least 50% of your life is going to be failure, right? Because I don't know a single filmmaker that just carried making genius film after genius film, you know, and was loved all the time, or a musician or anybody. Like, everyone fails, right? And then you have a success. It feels sweet for a while. But even then, success makes you very insecure because you know that they're going to kill you in the next one. Particularly first-time directors and filmmakers, you know, and you get rave reviews for your first film. Almost inevitably, they'll kill you on the next one or the one after because they're just waiting for you to fail. And that's what criticism has become, which is sick, you know. I mean,
that's not necessarily failure, though, is it? I mean, wouldn't you say you define your own failure?
No, other people define it for you in terms of, you may have your own definition of I'm a genius and I'm not a failure, but if everybody else thinks you're a failure, then try and raise money for your next film, and you know, then you understand the practical reality of failure.
So you're talking about commercial failure or audience failure rather than
both.
Aesthetic failure?
You know, both. You know, if you're not aesthetically appreciated on any level for something that you've done, it will be very hard for you then to raise money for your next venture. And unfortunately, filmmaking does involve some degree of, you know, unlike writing, does involve the need to get somebody else's money. You know, so it is linked in, and then it becomes hard to separate your feeling of failure. If you can't work, you feel like you failed. You know, because your self-esteem drops and all of that.
Earlier you said that if you graduate you can find the money from somewhere.
Mhm.
But how accessible would you say the British film industry is for young filmmakers?
I would always look outside the film industry. You know, I mean, if you write something that's kind of sweet and commercial, and that definitely fits into the niche of what, let's say, this kind of a company, let's say Working Title or something like that. But even then, it's like if you don't know someone who knows someone, it's very hard to get your foot in the door. And also, the further away from London you are, and they're all based on BFI, all the big film companies. So you come in as an outsider if you don't live there, and it's really hard. And you don't regional accent. Already you've kind of almost marginalised yourself. You know, they're very elitist. You know, and they're snobs, and they're like I wrote this article. It's just they're all in clubs, and it's like snooty clubs at that. You know, with very unspoken rules about how you behave in that club or this club. You know, the way the Brits do this, like better than anybody else in the world, is kind of almost invisible class divisions that they create. You know, so almost like in the same way I said, you know, what is a cinema? Define your own cinema. Define your own funding source. It's like there's so much money up here, despite the unemployment and everything. You also know there's loads and loads of people with a lot of money, you know, and disposable wealth because they're crooks or they don't want to pay tax. You know, this is often can be tax refundable, or they can lose money. And the kind of money that we or you would ask for them it's nothing. It's peanuts. You know, so it's really then the question is how do you present yourself in the correct way to get money? Now that is very important. If you just kind of go, well, we're just a bunch of students, we're making a film, that kind of go, good luck, get out of my drive, you know, to have the butler set the dogs on them, you know. But on the other hand, you know, if you can present it in a way that's cool, that means, the people who don't necessarily want to be directors but want to produce, or critique or whatever, start thinking about your image. You know, I hate to say it, but it's vital. If you present yourself as like the coolest thing since sliced bread, and if you play your cards right and give me 20 grand, you could be part of this, because this is... And then you need people like me, or anybody you can get your hands on to kind of say, oh yeah, I'm a trustee, or I'm on the committee or something like this, and I'll write a letter for you, You need to really, really work hard getting backing. First of all, PR, that's a PR exercise, and secondly, then identify the money, and then go for it, through whatever means,
How, as a director, how do you make sure that you don't end up falling into some kind of rhythm that with movies, or fall into cliches, like say Michael Bay, how he just does candy-clad women and explosions all the time.
With Michael Bay, it's more like, how can my fee go up?
Yeah, right.
You know how much he got for the last Terminator? What's
Transformers.
Transformers, whatever.
Yeah.
I think he took home 70 million, but that wasn't including some of the franchise. So he couldn't give a flying fart about genre or whether he's making... Yeah. In fact, it's about making the same movie over and over again. It's just that the special effects will be slightly different and all the... And then he has a geek following, those films, they function, in a certain, very specific kind of way.
Not a lot of people like them though. Yeah,
I think a lot of people like them.
Yeah, but more.
Otherwise you wouldn't be taking on something. They work. I mean, that's commercial filmmaking. Mm-hmm. It's almost like that's separate from... That's like the industry. Mm-hmm. It's comics, it's franchise, it's, gaming, it's all that.
And like how I just want to bring up how if you're directing, how if you're working in film, mostly but also if you go into areas like TV, is there more pressure in directing a TV episode than just an entire film, because of reshoots?
I think there's less, because you probably have to achieve less in an episode. It's almost certainly shorter, right? Although you may be doing 4 episodes of maybe 15 minutes, so in the end it'll be longer. It depends. I don't think there's any difference. I mean, they have merged together now in an interesting way. Like I was saying last night, I mean, pretty much all the good film stuff now is on telly, I think. I would rather, I'd probably be more guaranteed a good result of watching something if I watch an HBO miniseries now than if I probably go and see a feature. Unless I go and see an old film. I mean, I now pretty exclusively have started catching up on old films that I never saw, like films from the 40s and things like that, early film noir films, you know. I'll get interested in an actor like Robert Mitchum, and then I'll kind of go, I really want to see this, and this film, you know, and it's quite specific, because I'm now kind of in a way historically interested in cinema. But I will kind of, I mean, every year I get every film free, you know, because once you've been nominated for an Academy Award, you join the Academy, and then now you get every DVD of every film that's released that's going to be nominated comes through your letterbox before Christmas. And then the European Film Academy is the same. You get all European films. So you end up with this massive pile of DVDs, which you think, great, you know. And then you start plowing through them and you think, wow, this is a bit like being in prison, you know. Because, you know, only one or two of them will be memorable, you know, and the rest are just like formulaic, you know.
Yeah.
What opportunities did you get within film? Because I know that you got turned down by the BFIs a couple of times, and then you went to America. What made you go there, and what opportunities did you get there?
Okay, I made a film here in Newcastle, Tony Monday. When it came out, half of it was American money, half of it actually was British Screen that existed then, and Channel 4. And it came out, it got lousy reviews here. It didn't really do much business, but they released it in New York and LA, and it did really well. It got fantastic reviews in New York Times, LA Times. It became a cult film there, little cult film. And on the strength of that, I got an agent. And then I met Clint Eastwood. He immediately offered me a film, which was a really crap script, so I turned it down, which he never spoke to me again, so that was a shame. And then I got offered a really good script, which I worked on, I rewrote, called The Hotspot, and then that collapsed because the producer was a dickhead and managed to lose all the actors that I put together by insulting them. And then Internal Affairs, I read it as a script, and then I just fought for it. And the reason I was in America was because they had, in a way, invited me. They said, we like you as a filmmaker, we like your stuff, maybe come and make a film here, you know, and I suddenly had an agent. And then I was reading, people were giving me scripts with the idea that they might be interested in me making those films. And then I read Internal Affairs that was amazing, and I was in competition with 3 other American directors, and I dug my heels in, and I stayed for like 3 months, and I think I had to go to 4 different meetings each time to convince, you know, the studio that I could do it. And I knew this was an amazing opportunity, and I went for it, and I finally persuaded them, you know, I'm quite good at talking, to give me a chance.
So how did you start overall? Like, how did you think, like...
To start making films?
At the beginning, like, where did you see, like, how did you get to...
Like you guys. I mean, I studied music. That was my background. So I'm a qualified music teacher. I played in bands up here and then a bit down south. And then as a musician, I joined a theatre group. And then I really liked it. I liked this theatre stuff. So, and then it was like a classic scene where one night there was a big fight, half the actors walked out and someone said, you've got to go on stage. And I went, okay, you know. So I went on stage and I decided I liked acting. So I did that for 10 years, touring around all over the place, learning the craft, if you like. And then I bought a camera. I bought a Super 8 camera and I started filming just stuff. And then I became interested in using film in theatre. And then at a certain point I thought, you know, I'd really like to just make a film. Tried to go to film school, didn't get in. And then was kind of determined just to make a film, so I did. So really low budget, I made my first film, Super 16, no, Standard 16. and then Channel 4 came along, and I was very aware of opportunities when they came. Like, this could be the last opportunity I'll ever get, because at that point it was even 10 times more difficult to get into the film business than it is even now. You know, you had to really be a member of a club, you know, and you had to, in fact, also be a member of a union. And the union wouldn't let you join unless you'd made a film. It's like, right, so how do you get in? You know, You can't get in unless you made a film. How do you make a film? You join the union. How do you join the union? You make a film. It's like, am I missing something? Or is this verging on the insane? You know. And then when Channel 4 came along, they gave me a dispensation for one film only, and then after that the unions kind of slightly disappeared, and so it wasn't a closed shop anymore. You could make a film, but it was a struggle, you know, really, and like it is now. But there's much more information available now, like my book. If you read my book, it really kind of like tries to go through all of the stages of making a film and what problems might be, you know. And I wrote it as a kind of user-friendly book for students, you know. Like, if you're having this problem, try this or whatever. If the actor is doing this, try this, you know. So it's, you know, it'll always be a struggle. You're choosing something that is high risk, low success rate, you know, all the rest of it, but fantastic. If you bond together and create a strong enough group of people, you have 100 times more chance than if you do it by yourself.
I'm sorry. You know, like you said about clubs and the sort of the snobby societies and such, how everyone knows someone,
Mm-hmm.
and when you're an outsider, you don't know anyone. Is it? Sounds like the cliche thing where actually you should be yourself, but like, is it better to walk the walk, to talk the talk? Is it better to try and, instead of standing out from the crowd for being the wacky one, is it better to try and appear, you know, when the world is crazy, is it better to appear insane? You know, do you want to look like everyone else?
I would say no, I'd say the opposite. If you think back, let's say to, you know, a very creative period, the 60s, certainly with music, right? So like you get suddenly groups like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or, you know, from here, the Animals or whatever, suddenly appearing, almost like spontaneously. There's a kind of an appearance of a new culture. And the old culture, the club, with its attitudes of you can't come in because you're not a member, suddenly kind of going, wow, what's that new club? And what really pissed them off was that the new club had no interest in them. Like, they just said, you know what, you're old-fashioned, you're really fucking boring. You know, we don't have anything to do with Cliff Richards, actually, or, you know, Mantovani, or the Black and White Minstrel Show, or whatever, Morecambe and Wise, you know. Like, that's a nice, cozy culture. This is much harder, this is much more to do with young people, you know, working class people, etc., etc. Fuck you, we're doing our own thing, you know. And suddenly, all those people want to join that club, because it's new and it's got an energy and it's not. So the answer is, don't join that club, make your own, but make it really good. And like all the things I've said, like, think about the presentation. Think about, like, we're doing something different, and we don't need you. Because in terms of equipment, you don't. For the first time, you don't economically need the big brother, the daddy, you know, to give you, like, a pat on the head and give you the equipment. You can get it easily, you know. What you need to do is get your own self-confidence going and start quietly doing something that becomes attractive to them, and they will come to you. But you've got to work on your image, you know. I mean, it's like the Beatles actually did not come out of a vacuum, you know what I mean? They didn't just suddenly whoosh appear like the Monkees, or, you know what I mean? They were created, ultimately, and there was a PR exercise involved in that. And Brian Epstein was making very specific decisions about what they were wearing and the haircuts. And so I'm not saying you have to go that far.
Even the members of the band.
Huh?
Even the members of the band, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that was very commercial, you know, quite blatantly commercial approach to it. But at the root of it was an energy which wasn't. You know, he saw something that had great potential, and he started kind of like manipulating it. And then, you know, pretty quickly it became part of the mainstream, as things do. And that was, you know, the world of popular music and so on. In film, it's not quite such a big deal, but at the same time, you do have to think about how you present yourself. Otherwise, you're just another bunch of young people asking for a handout, you know? You need to create your own internal strength, and that makes you 10 times stronger. You know?
I know you said about the pile of DVDs and you don't always get watched, and I was just going to ask, do you have any personal favourite British directors at the moment?
At the moment?
Yeah. Well, not necessarily British anymore.
You mean of the new crop?
Yeah.
No, I don't. And I would be speaking in an uninformed way because I'm not that aware of who they are even, you know. Because there's so much material out there now that it's hard to, it's like, you know, people tell me you should check out this person, you know, and I mean to, but I'm also very busy doing my own stuff, you know, and part of that deal is I don't know that much about films, to be honest, about the history. You know, I'm not quite talented. I haven't seen 5 million, you know, films. I'm not a geek in that way. I've seen a lot of films, but I've also tended to spend most of my time making films rather than looking at, you know, like a composer that I really love, Charles Ives, once was asked, he was a very avant-garde, turn-of-the-century composer, and somebody said, Charles, do you see a lot of new work? And he said, you know, I don't, because it confuses me. Either I see something and they're doing something a bit like I'm doing and it really depresses me, or I just get confused. So it's actually easier for me not to look at other people's work, just to get on and do my own, which is not a bad piece of advice, because otherwise, you think of all the movies where you think, somebody was asking about genre, right? I mean, you could be so seduced into trying to make a film like, I don't know, Quentin Tarantino, or trying to make a comedy like, you know, Seth Rogen or whatever, you know, because there are so many examples. And I guess do you all watch a lot of movies?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, movies or television, particularly films? And
Kind of both, actually, really.
And what do you watch on? Do you watch on DVD or do you go to the cinema primarily?
Mostly, mostly cinema. It's usually a weekly ritual, actually, for me. But
You go?
yeah.
How many people regularly go to the cinema and pay money? How many people would be put off by the cost of the ticket? That's good, that's healthy. If you don't go, why don't you go? Well, you didn't put your hand up, did you?
No, I feel that cinema is becoming recently post-apocalyptic genre that I'm not interested in.
Yeah.
It sort of saddens me that people would rather go and see something with a great deal of special effects, with a great deal of... It's almost like the art of, like, conversation and dialogue is lost.
Yeah. So what do you watch then instead?
I tend to watch a lot of old films, Hitchcock's.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer to study that kind of...
What's your favourite period?
50s.
50s, yeah.
On the waterfront. That sort of film interests me more than...
Right. And anybody else? What periods? Who's primarily interested in what's happening in cinema right now? Critics.
It's a very interesting part at the moment because it actually kind of looks like cinema's getting itself into a bit of a rut because they're either remaking a film or they're doing just the same, you know, end of the world with massive explosions and green screens and all this at the moment, and it just seems to be that it feels like there's going to be one movie that is probably going to make people realise, hang on, we've just seen this so many times before. We're just having enough of it. I mean, quite a lot of what was it, that one that just came out, The Lone Ranger? That's been set up to be that's been marketed to death, and like, oh, it's got Jolly Depp and all that, but Disney are making it's been forecast they're going to make something like £100 million loss from it, because I think people are just maybe starting to get
Yeah, it's an odd one, because I remember seeing the trailer when I was in America, and the trailer is amazing, you know, it's like, it's not my cup of tea, but, you know, I was thinking, wow, that looks really good. And obviously, trailers are much easier to cut than feature films, so something went horribly wrong, and people are blaming the fact that maybe Johnny Depp has been used one too many times, you know, and maybe it's time he grew up or something, you know, that he also overshadows the character playing the Lone Ranger, which is maybe the wrong balance, I don't know. I'm kind of interested to see it now, to see what went wrong, you know, because this was something that would have been marketed to death, you know. And certainly the previews and the trailers have been out there for 6 months as a coming attraction. Who do you all watch, for example, young contemporary British filmmakers, or do you tend to watch? Yeah? Hands up if you're interested in the younger, young British filmmakers.
I've recently watched, it was a couple of years ago, he made, was it Geffen Edwards? He made that Monsters film that he completely shot, he made the little special effects.
Yeah, I
and
saw it. It's great.
He's been picked up by Legendary now, actually. He's making the remake of he's doing a reboot of the Godzilla franchise. He's been put in charge of that. But I really liked that monster film because it wasn't actually, it was called Monsters, yeah, but it wasn't about
I liked it. It was amazing what he managed to achieve. What other directors that you put the hand up? British filmmakers.
I think I was really enticed to the person who directed The King's Speech, Tony.
Oh, really? Okay.
Whether from what he did and just been fascinated by his work on the British Institute from that film and now how he's paid on into Les Miserables, just to show what a scope he's from British filmmaking in his own country to American Hollywood style.
I mean, I can be candid with you. I detested both the second film. But then, that's kind of healthy. It was successful, etc. But
just because it's successful doesn't mean it's good.
No, I mean it's a matter of opinion. Like a lot of people obviously did like it, and there are a lot of fans of the musical, obviously, who also responded to it. But I mean, I'm thinking more of because he's in a sense he's old school. He's a traditional filmmaker. I'm thinking more like a bit more edgy, sort of younger.
I've noticed quite a lot of
Ben Whitley.
Right.
Ben Whitley, who directed like Kill List and just released The Field of England. Sightseers.
Who's also come up with the whole strategy of how to release a film.
Big marketing strategy for Field of England, did like the multi-platform release for it and everything.
Yeah, a little bit of a gimmick, one wonders how often you could do that. What do you think about the genre of what young British film tends to focus on in terms of, is it, do you want to make local films about local issues, or do you want to make a kind of, let's say, films where concepts are a bit more kind of national, international? And somebody else who's
sorry, I'm
been a bit shyer. Who hasn't spoken? Tom hasn't spoken.
I think what British filmmakers tend to focus on, in my view, is kind of what you were saying, like local issues, especially with stuff like Kiddlehood, and there was a couple of movies in that series. And I think it tends to be quite a big focus on crime, like even unusual directors like Ben Wheatley, they focus a lot on crime as well, like Sightseers and Kill List. And I don't know, I personally am more interested in people like Paul Thomas Anderson.
Do you mean which one?
Not the Resident Evil one.
Okay.
The Velvet Blood one.
Yeah, sure.
Rather than contemporary young British filmmakers.
I mean, one of the challenges is, as I discovered, when you go to America, it's much easier to make a film from an aesthetic point of view, because it's almost like they've sort of invented it, you think, which is not true, of course, but the cinema image is a kind of Americana, very, very strongly kind of stamped on it. So certain kind of light, certain architecture, the look of America, the sound of America, American cars and those kind of things, they kind of invite you in a way. And there is a kind of universality to the story, funnily enough, even though ultimately they're local stories, right? They're just as much of a local story as something like Kes or something is. They just happen to take place in Chicago or LA or New York. And the minute you're in New York, it's like, wow, It's got more of a wow factor than, let's say, the Yorkshire Dales, for some reason. So the challenge here is how do you, in a way, bring the film up to the level of that wow factor, the big wow screen factor, with, and that's an interesting challenge for the cinematographer. Like I said, then really start thinking about light. Because one thing I noticed about a lot of contemporary English films, British films, is that the light is ugly. You know, in a lot of the films, the lighting is ugly also. BBC dramas tend to look ugly compared to The Wire, which is far grungier, grittier film. You get the British equivalent on BBC, and it's like, my first thought is, wow, that lighting's horrible. It's overlit. It's like trying to do Hollywood, but it hasn't quite pulled it off. There's too much colour. There's too much something, you know. And I watched an episode of Luther, which was like, oh my God, what? Anyway, you know, I just thought, oh my God.
What would you say is, like away from